Hello, fuckers. We've spent the month of May talking about predation and prey in the Traumatized Motherfuckers Patreon feed. It has been insightful and terrifying. Reminder, you can now hear the summary episodes of those posts on the new public feed called just Traumatized Motherfuckers. It's available wherever you podcast for free with some delay in release. That's where they get you. Check the episode description for the direct link to that new show. Check the Patreon for the full research and personal episodes and more. And all month in that feed, we've been discussing revictimization from a few angles. First, we began with a community feedback episode led by some predators themselves, where we learned what cues are commonly consciously detected in viable victims, talking about subtle ways that your nervous system and psychological boundaries are tested, tiny social niceties that might be revealing your soft underbelly. Yeah, you know it. It was a concerning and highly impactful collection of feedback from folks who've done enough inner work to know the instincts of their darker parts that they are actively managing. Then, from there, we jumped into an article on the psychological and emotional components of a previously maltreated child, now adult's mind, which commonly lead to exposure to dangerous situations, which then lead to relived abuse. And the reason why this revictimization replays isn't subconsciously needing to relive past trauma. Instead, from this article, we got a full model of the ways that negative core beliefs lead to emotional dysregulation, which ends in risky coping behaviors. That is where the danger takes place. When you believe you and the world are garbage, you then have no way to rebalance negative emotions. This leaves you at risk of executing unhealthy behaviors to moderate the pain. This is where the predators step in. From that point, we talked about another two peer-reviewed studies on the victim's gait, explicitly defining the characteristics of a walk that can be accurately read by psychopaths to indicate prior assault victims in the people being observed. In a set of findings so interesting that we spent 2 weeks talking through the complex trauma connections to having a weak or poorly utilized core, how PTSD encourages this condition, and its connections to later psychosomatic ailments. Then, this week, we're covering one final article on the topic, discussing the verbal signals of trauma that can be similarly detected by potentially dangerous people. Can assault history be picked up from vocal tone alone? Yes. Perhaps through slow speech, monotone, and sound wave perturbations relating to vagus nerve condition, something we'll be discussing next month. And language matters too. It was found that death-related words, negatively emotional words, body-related words, and a plethora of words. All in all, it's been a month of realizing all the things our bodies might be revealing about us, which aren't only bastions of horror, but helpful points for self-awareness and zoning in on the healing points that might be left in your journey. So, don't use this knowledge for social avoidance. Leverage it to recover based on what it indicates about the subconscious body and mind that could still use a little work and re-relating. And on that note, I have for you today the summary episode from the Victim's Gait research. What might your core indicate about your mental and emotional integration to potentially dangerous people who might be watching? Please enjoy this offering. Remember, you can now get 3 or 4 of these shows free on the new Traumatized Motherfucker public stream with some delay. That stream is linked here in show notes. And for the full research details with excerpts, personal bonuses, weekly Discord discussions, and course formatted content, it'll be that Patreon feed that you're looking for. Come hit up the whole shebang at patreon.com/traumatizedmotherfuckers. Thanks for being here and being interested in learning about you. Enjoy, and I'll talk to you next month, or so much sooner. Dealer's choice. Here it is, and bye-bye. We're told that victims attract predators, that they can read it on us. But how? Last time, we discussed psychological factors that mediate the relationship between childhood abuse and adult revictimization. This time, let's talk about how bodily movement, specifically characteristics of walking, can signal an easy mark to a psychopath. This is the summary episode of the research. If you're a goddamn nerd or something, check out the full version of the show, where we also run through the research excerpts that might really butter your biscuit. Today, we'll be checking out the paper Psychopathy and Victim Selection, the use of Gait as a cue to vulnerability by Angela Book, Kimberly Costello, and Joseph A. Camilleri. It was published in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence in 2013, and they tell us that Ted Bundy once claimed he could read a victim by her manner of walking. Is that fact or one of his famous fictions? We know that nonverbal signals are detected by others, helping them to understand our personalities and life qualities. Does it also suggest vulnerability? It could, through revealing factors of dominance or submission, confidence, ease of physical assault, and perhaps prior victimization experiences. Men are shown to potentially prey upon more submissive women, as determined by watching videos of the women conversationally. Those who used smaller gestures were perceived to be less assertive and therefore better choices for victimizing. And of course, eye contact and posture are correlated with real and judged dominance across the gender spectrum. And on top of these smaller movements, walking gait has been shown as a form of bodily cue that allows predators to accurately assess victims based on whole body movement. Signs of vulnerability include extreme stride lengths, long or short, gestured versus postured movements, so leading with limbs versus the core, and lifting of feet rather than casually swinging them. Less synchronous, more disjointed movements were indicators of prior victim experiences. It appears that bodily flow and ease are unattractive to predators, but also don't get too easeful because slow walking and short strides also suggest vulnerability to sexual exploitation, as judged by, quote, men. Now, let's talk about some more extreme personalities as they might be interpreting these movements. Research has previously shown that psychopathic characteristics are correlated with a stronger memory for exploitable behaviors and also ease of victimization. Psychopaths should be especially skilled in detecting these cues per their aims of manipulating and exploiting others. It's an ability that they cultivate throughout a lifetime. The diagnosis is defined by lack of empathy, poor behavioral controls, lack of remorse, and cruelty, characteristics that are actually split into two different categories. The first being their emotional and material targeting of others, and the second category being their impulsive and disorganized nature. Taken together, violence is not outside their wheelhouse, nor is antisocial behavior. Up to 25% of prison populations are made of psychopathic individuals, and they may be responsible for half of violent crimes. As social predators, therefore, they must be skilled in noticing and taking advantage of vulnerable others. So, they are perfect for this research method. The first study on this subject of psychopathic detection of nonverbal cues utilized undergraduate students. In this present study, the authors chose to use inmates with at least one violent offense conviction. The majority had multiple. Inmates were allowed to opt in or out of the study, and if they opted in, it allowed researchers to access their files. This included rundowns of their criminal history, as well as psychiatric information. The inmates then watched 12 clips of people walking and rated each on their perceived vulnerability to victimization. And what did they find? Discussion. Can psychopathic individuals detect prior victims based on gait? Yes, it appears that they can. The higher the psychopathy score, the greater their accuracy. The authors distinguish that this result is related to the psychopathic traits of manipulativeness, charm, and lack of empathy, the more antisocial traits. The other traits, such as impulsiveness, may actually make them less effective. So, I suppose if we care to turn the tables, we should watch out for psychopaths who make poor life decisions and code them as less viable predators. It is unclear if this detection process is conscious or unconscious, but in the present study, factors such as the individual's build, sex, and anticipated fitness were key determinants of perceived potential victims, perhaps suggesting some conscious behavior is present. And inmates with higher manipulative and exploitative scores were also shown to be more conscious of gait when making their judgments. This might mean that psychopaths are indeed aware of what they're analyzing, even if it may be at first at an instinctual level. Though the responsibility does not lie on us to prevent future harm, what can we do to protect ourselves in the ways that we can? Mind our vulnerable body language as possible. And if you also thought that we didn't get enough details on the walking characteristics that make us walking target practice, don't worry, because I want to be explicit. So I did some extra digging. It was a surprising pain in the dick to access this, but here is the paper. Attracting Assault, Victims' Nonverbal Cues by Betty Grayson and Morris I. Stein from the Journal of Communication, 1981. The first research studying the connection between psychopathic traits and potential victims' walking gaits. Here we learn more about the bodily characteristics and signals that put us at risk. Older men and women are more likely to be assault targets, likely due to their perceived fitness that we just mentioned. Additionally, relative stride compared to height is seen as a potential sign. If the length seems average, you are more likely to be left alone. Furthermore, we can watch how the leg moves for hints. If it swings easily from the hip joint as weight is shifted, and if body weight shifts forward and backward or in a full rotation during strides, we are less preyable. Also, if we can walk with our whole bodies in synchrony, leading from the core, postural walking, they call it, we appear less vulnerable. Gestural movement, separate individual body part movements, suggest dissonance, discomfort, inconsistency. This is a fitting finding for our community, considering how integration is such a challenge for the CPTSD crew. We often operate out of psychological or personality parts, and it would seem that this extends to our relationship with our bodies. Of course, disembodiment problems also pervade this population and could lend themselves to the unsynchronous movement that point towards prior victims. When our bodies have been used and abused, leveraged against us, betrayed, and betraying, we have difficult, incohesive, and strenuous relationships with them, which appear to come out in our gaits. As they say, the perceived victims are non-synchronous or anti-synchronous within themselves, something that accurately describes many of our psychological conditions. Overall, an identified victim will move one side of their body at a time rather than contralaterally. So instead of swinging right arm with left leg, they motion right arm with right leg, again reducing fluidity in their movement. And lastly, accurately perceived victims tend to lift their feet, not swing them, which adds again a disjointed and graceless effect to the gait. Perhaps a sign of conscious attempts at moving rather than an easeful, embodied experience. So, to conclude, aim for an average stride. Move your weight in a figure 8 shape. Lead from the core. Allow limbs to work together with ease and flow. Synchronize left arm with right leg and vice versa. And swing your feet. Do not lift them. All of these things increase a sense of awkwardness and uncomfortability, and it's easy to see how that perception would leap into vulnerability. And as for their conclusion, the authors state, perhaps some of the behaviors of the potential victims involve what Gohan refers to as gestural hinting, whereby victims unconsciously state their vulnerability, and criminals, probably also on an unconscious level, read that message. Further support for this idea comes from the respondents themselves, who indicated during these conversations that any dude who looked different would probably be a target of assault. Further questioning revealed looking different meant a different physical appearance in clothing and accessories. In other words, beyond the unconscious awareness of behavioral differences, differences in modes of dress and display were consciously recognized as a sign of vulnerability. A number of studies have called attention to the fact that people participate in their own victimization through the situations in which they place themselves. The results reported here extend these findings to include movement as an important component of potential victimization. A nonverbal dialogue seems to exist between criminal and victim, through which the victim communicates his or her vulnerability to the criminal in much the same way releaser mechanisms operate in the animal world. Side note, releaser mechanisms are devices or processes that initiate the release of a substance, object, or behavior. So, for example, certain colors in certain animals eliciting aggressive responses from other members of that species. This finding might be relayed to potential victims in programs of behavior modification. Those who could not be properly trained to adopt new movements might at least be alerted to those aspects of their behavior which appear to signal vulnerability to assault. So, these are a few postural ways to impact your perceived victimability. And although it's not your fault if it does happen again, I think we can all agree that it would be pretty great if it didn't. Thank you for being here, examining both papers, psychopathy and victim selection, the use of Gait as a cue to vulnerability, and attracting assault, victims' nonverbal cues. Many thanks to our authors. And don't forget, practice your empowered walk. It's a good way to increase mindfulness and skeletal alignment while you take a stroll, if nothing else. It's also a great way to get out of your head and manage stress while noticing what's really going on inside that body. And with all of our embodiment challenges leading to disjointed and attention earning movements, psychosomatic illnesses, chronic numbness, and so many other problems, let's take all the multimodal self-help we can get. Practice your empowered gait and let me know how it goes. If you care to hear the extra 6 pages of research excerpts that informed this summary, check that Patreon for the full chomp, a title inspired by my dog, Marcus Barkus. Thank you again for being here, supporting this project when there are so many other ways to spend your time, attention, or money. I love learning about trauma with you and uncovering these nuggets of knowledge. Until we speak again next time, hail yourself, heal your damn walk, while you also heal the relationship with your body. Come hear me talk about physical therapy, doing just that in the bonus episode that is following this one. As someone who forgot how to walk for a few years, did this paper hit a little too close to home as it spoke about asynchronous movement? Yes, enough that I screamed out loud. I'll tell you what I've seen. And either way, I'll talk to you soon as we discuss the verbal clues that help them pick us out of a crowd. See you then. Bye-bye.